Hey everybody, welcome on tonight. I'm talking with my friend Gunnar Thorderson. Gunnar, how are you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing great, Jacob. How are you?
Doing all right. Hey, so just so everybody knows, Gunnar is someone who not only has the coolest name that you never forget ever, his cool Icelandic name, but he also is an interesting conservative. I've found you to be an interesting conservative because you're not a full-on conservative in a lot of ways. You kind of spread your wings over both camps on certain issues. But I find that interesting. And I think it would be fun for us to have a conversation about everything that's going on from kind of two different perspectives within the conservative movement.
Yeah, no, I'd love to. Yeah, and just like on that, I think just because of how like I had a really like libertarian upbringing with my political start, so I kind of gravitated toward like social issues that the left aligned more with, and like creating allyships over there, and still being like very fiscally conservative, and having my upbringing on the right, and just all my family being conservative. It's just like that's where I've always had a home, and so I just found it easier to like find my core values on the right, and like the principles that I stand for, and like my approach, and but still having like being an ally on core key issues that have always meant something to me, and that's just where those connections are, and sort of like understand where those people are coming from, and to share that side of things when those issues are on the forefront of the national attention. That's kind of where you get to see both sides of me, and so
Cool.
yeah.
Cool. Well, and that's kind of where we want to go. I specifically kind of this allyship, right? I think you definitely, I'm kind of guessing here, but I think you kind of consider yourself an ally to kind of the Black community.
Yeah.
I consider myself a definite friend to the Black community. I don't know that people would, based on my rhetoric, would say that I'm an ally per se.
Right.
I definitely consider Black people to be my friends, and I look at them just like I look at everybody. But with that in mind, let's take a look into this. So my first question that I kind of want to understand from your perspective, like, what do you see as someone who has a leaning towards the Black Lives Matter movement? What do you see the movement as really being about?
I think for them, like it's about recognition, and like putting their people, their Black leaders, the Black artists, Black voices, figures in that community, people who identify with advancing their cause, and protecting their interests, and making sure that their voices are heard. I think it's just about like amplifying those people, and just kind of saying to people who are non-Black or non-minority, let's let them have the conversation in the mic, and let them kind of say what's going on, and their
so
faith.
kind of
Yeah.
So kind of to make the basically to put the voices of Black people out there so that Black lives become more significant in society. Is that kind of the way that you see it?
Yeah, I think I'm sure we'll get into the data here. I think for a lot of even Black conservatives who kind of look at the data and they say like, hey, this shouldn't be as big of an issue as we're making it. Like for the Black community, they feel like there's this real fear there that like isn't addressed enough in a way where we're actually making policy changes to make community policing, and accountability for police brutality and things like that more in the front of the nation's conversation, and like making those policies happen, not just like on a national scale where we're like pushing out police camps, but like in every single precinct and department in every local community, both urban and rural, where minorities exist and have these real altercations with police. And maybe like the media is talking a lot about it and making it an issue, And, all these white people are just like, look, like we talk about it enough. Like, look, it's so much in our attention, but like, they just don't see those things happening on the ground. And these people just want to amplify the concerns that they still have, that things are not changing in the way that they need to for these people to feel like, they don't have to live in fear because the cops aren't going to harass them like they feel like they're being harassed in an unfair way when they see footage of, white people putting their hand on their gun and nothing happening, right? Or white people, getting a bunch of guns and marching peacefully and not having a swarm of police with hands drawn, all guns drawn, saying, we think there's a weapon, you better drop everything. And it's just like,
it sounds like
the difference in the way that, they see themselves being treated versus white people is just too apparent for them, for us to not be having a conversation about that inequity.
So, and that's something that I struggle with, because here's the thing. We all know in today's day and age, the media has an enormous amount of power. It can really shape the way that you view the world.
Yeah.
If all you did was watch MSNBC, or all you did was watch Fox News or Breitbart, or, something like that, you'd have a very different perception of what the world is like compared to if you got a more balanced perspective.
Right.
And so one of the challenges that I run into, and that I've been very kind of critical of, is that there is an assumption here that these people are afraid. And I believe they are. Like, I don't think they're lying. Like, I think they are. They're afraid. They feel like the police are out to get them and all this kind of stuff. And they attribute it to racism. And my thing is, the data just doesn't seem to back that. Okay. I mean, just a few things. Okay. Let's talk about like unjust killing of black people. Okay. You go on to YouTube, you can find 5 YouTubes of, videos of in 5 minutes of black guys being unarmed and, with a cop with his knee on his neck, or Ahmaud Arbery getting shot by guys when he wasn't actually breaking any laws, all this kind of stuff. Right. And immediately you start thinking, oh my gosh, like this is it. And these things get tons of media attention. But when you actually look at the data, so there were 10 million arrests in the last year, 10 million arrests. Now, of that 10 million, 1,000 of them ended in someone being killed, in the suspect being shot by police. Okay. Now, the thing is we don't know how often are those. What was that?
That's reported.
Yes, but I'm gonna go on what we see reported. Okay, I'm not going to assume that all the Bureau of Justice statistics are bad, because then again, I'm venturing into the realm of I don't know, right? And if we're not going to trust,
let's quickly make a principled assumption here. If police departments were trying to hide behavior they didn't want to report to the Bureau, which way would the data skew to account for the human error of cops trying to cover their bad behavior? Right.
Certainly. But I would say, I mean, I can see that incentive is there.
Go
ahead.
I'm just saying the data would definitely skew toward being underreported. Right.
Would that be an argument from ignorance? Kind of we don't know that, they might be doing this. I mean, it's true. I mean,
look, we can continue the conversation based on the reported data. I just wanted to have that moment there to create that very important characteristic or point on the data. Okay, but
fair enough. So with the data, 10 million arrests. Okay. You got 1,004 people get shot out of 10 million arrests. Now, granted, remember, only 41 of those people were not armed, which means, that means 997 were armed individuals, or 950 were armed individuals, meaning the cops probably shot them because they were in danger of the cop's life. Okay. So you have 41 people that were unarmed. Now, we might assume, based on the narratives in the media, you'd think, well, how many of those people were black? Probably all 41 of them, right? Actually, only 9 of them were black. So out of the 41 unarmed people shot by cops the last year, only 9 were black. And we're out in the streets rioting And there's a narrative out there that cops are out there hunting down black people. And consider this. 89 cops were killed last year. That means more innocent police officers were killed by a factor of almost 10 when compared to the number of blacks who were killed. And then we take into consideration this. Some people say, well, but blacks make up a smaller portion of the population. You're right. Blacks also, based on the FBI statistics, are 3 times more likely to kill a cop than a white suspect. Now, here's my thing.
Right.
No one should, and especially not a police officer, should judge someone based on their appearance and their race. Okay? A cop should not assume that because you're black, you must be a criminal. Okay? That's not right. However, and I don't excuse this as okay, I'm just saying that the motivation here, are you a racist when you go into a bad neighborhood and you see a bunch of black dudes approaching you and you get a little nervous? Is that you being a racist?
I don't think so. I mean,
and why not?
I mean, I think we have a lot of like preconceived ideas, you know, given on all the media that we've consumed since we've been born, right? The culture and the way things are depicted. Look at the doll test. Like there's a bias against blackness in our society. There's a bias against blackness.
I would say, but is it because of their race? So here's where I make a little bit of a distinction here. So you have, I mean, here's what's really crazy. Remember, blacks make up 13% of the population, but young black males who between the age of like 15 and 50, that's where all the crime's happening. 50% of murders are from 4% of the population. Okay? It's the same reason that, am I a sexist if when I'm around a dude who's a big, strong guy, if I'm a little more careful about like what I'm doing than if I'm around a 87-year-old 4'2" Asian lady? Like, that isn't racism. That isn't sexism. That's just the reality of different demographics of people have different problems. And here's my thing. Do you, as someone who falls on kind of the, leans towards the movement, are you someone who recognizes that there is a violent crime problem in the black community? Do you think that there's more violent crime committed in black communities than in white communities?
I can't make a statement on the comparison. I haven't looked too much into the data. I do think there's a problem that needs to be addressed, and it definitely needs to be addressed more so than I think Obama was comfortable addressing. And I do think community leaders need to step up in the black community and start calling that behavior out, but more so coming up with things on the ground in those areas, like a cleaning up Chicago plan. Like how is the Black Lives Matter community, what is their current effort to clean up, places like Chicago, places like Baltimore, those areas where, I mean, I've been in those areas. I've sold door to door in Baltimore and in Chicago.
And were you more careful in those neighborhoods?
100%.
Was that because you're a racist?
No.
Should we expect cops in those neighborhoods to behave differently than if they're in, Provo, Utah?
100%. 100%.
Is that racism? Some would say it is.
I think like what this moment is kind of like more so focused on is this idea for the black community that, like, just in general, policing is biased against them, even when, based on these stereotypes, which again are historical and cultural, right? So it's like at the same time that we have to reframe, how, things are depicted in culture and the media, there's also like what's happening on the ground with police. And for them, it's like,
well, I would ask you this. When you're selling in Baltimore in a scary neighborhood, was it culture and media that made you afraid? Or do you think there was a legitimate reason to be worried when you were walking the streets of Baltimore?
Well, there are huge areas of Baltimore that I've worked that are primarily white, and the crime is bad, really bad.
No, for
and
sure.
it's, some white meth addict, or heroin addict coming out, breaking into all the cars, finding any chains they can and selling that for heroin money. Like, it's not just Black people that exhibit that behavior in these cities. It's very much from all the demographics: white, Hispanic, Black, all the ones that are predominant in those.
So if it's not a racial thing, what is the thing that is the unifying factor amongst these people that we all are kind of nervous to be around?
Well, I think you take that behavior, and I think like this is where we're getting back to like a general, like all else equal with the police, right? The police go into those communities in Baltimore where there are a bunch of, white crime, white drug, related things going on. The police approach those areas the same as they would the other side of the block where all the Black people live that exhibit that same behavior. It's two sides of the same coin. But in almost all of these places, they're segregated by color still, like the neighborhoods and whatnot. And so it's like,
well, and you and I are part of that. I think almost every racial, and I wouldn't even necessarily call it racial group. I'd say every cultural group tends to conglomerate with people that are of a similar culture, right? And I don't think that that's because of racism per se, as much as it is just preference. If you're a Black family that's a member of the church and you're super into like airsoft and paintball and like hunting, like, yeah, like you're going to be one of the boys. Like, I don't care what your skin color is, but different groups do have different cultures, and people tend to, even like for you, you probably are going to live in a neighborhood around people that are really pretty similar to you.
Yeah. And I think like getting back to like the current moments, like Black Lives Matter argument for like, for all of those different areas, like in general, all else equal, the police still approach the Black communities with a different type of bias, especially when those cops are white and they already have those stereotypes in their mind.
Well, I'll question that one for a second.
Okay.
Because in the data that I've seen, they have almost no difference between Black officers and white officers in the treatment of Black suspects, meaning Black cops shoot Black suspects just as much as white cops do. They stop them just as much as they do. They rough them up just as much as white cops do. There's not a significant difference between those. And judges, interestingly enough, same thing. People say, oh, well, they get longer sentences because of racism. And it's like, well, wait a minute. Then why are the Black judges giving the exact same sentences as the white judges? Now, with that said, do I think that and to your point, and I think this maybe I can jump on kind of the same side of the fence with you, there is a certain level of trepidation amongst any group that has a high crime potential. And we all know the signs of if someone has a higher crime potential, and it doesn't have to necessarily do with their skin color. I'll tell you what, if I see a Black dude walking down the street wearing a suit and tie, carrying a briefcase and a laptop, I'm not going to be thinking that guy's going to do something to me. Now, if a white guy comes around the corner and like you said, he's got missing half his teeth and he's acting erratic, dude, like I'm going to be scared of that guy. Now, my thing is that the Black community, unfortunately, has more people in it due to the problems that are within the community of drug use, violence, single parent homes, all these sorts of root causes that, I mean, it's not like Blacks are inherently like evil and bad. What it is that there are deeper root issues here. And if we want to help the Black community, we got to get to the root, right? Just saying, hey, more black people proportionately got killed than white people by the cops without factoring in violent crime rates and all these other variables. To me, it's like how we're every good intention, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. If we're not addressing the root of the problem, then what are we really doing? Is the movement misguided?
For the Black Lives Matter movement and for their side, like this is more about the system than it is anything. Like the system is inherently unfair. And to give an example, I worked last summer in Maryland, and very highly proportionate, African American. I'm like majority Black in these areas that I'm working. Now, the interesting thing was, there's speed traps all over Maryland. They literally they try to find as many reasons to pull people over as possible. And what I found interesting as I was staying here for months was I got pulled over more in this short amount of time that I lived there than in my entire life, right?
There probably were a lot of cops around.
Like it was just like every other day for just the randomest thing. And they're all white. All these cops were all white, and they just would let me go right away. Just, stop speeding, maybe slap me with a speeding ticket, but most of the time they just let me go, even if I was like 10 over. But what I saw the whole time I was there was Black people getting pulled over and pulled out of their vehicles, dogs searching, just constantly. And it was just like all over the place, just constantly them being pulled over by white cops that were from some other area, right? Like that. And so to like any like outside observer, it just seemed kind of effed up. Like it's like it wasn't people that like had grown up there and that were Black and that were in the community that were pulling these guys over and being like, Frank, you better stop speeding around this stop sign. I see you do this every day. It was like, these guys don't know these people. They had this like animosity toward them. And it's like, they're pulling me and my like other white sales guys over and just letting us go right away, or just slapping us with a ticket and just letting us go on our way. And maybe it's because we exhibit a very different look than they're used to for that area. And so they don't do their normal thing, which is to interrogate us, to, see, flashlights over the car, what's in here, where are you guys going, what's going on in here. And it's just, it could be a whole different world, a whole different police experience that I'm going through than my Black counterparts. And for them, it's just like telling white people, like, you guys aren't in our universe. You don't understand what we're going through. So just like amplify our voices. Let us tell you what's going on. Let us, bring these issues to the forefront. Give us a louder mic, and, let's start making actual change on the ground so that places like what I'm describing in Maryland, if that's going on in the South, in Mississippi and Alabama and in Georgia and all these places, and it's just racist white guys who still, are thinking back in slavery times and like, you Blacks, you ruined my southern town. I hate you. And that's the cop that they have to deal with every day. It's like,
well, and here's the thing. I've heard a lot of those. I've heard a lot of those kind of anecdotes and stories. Okay. And I don't doubt, I'm not doubting that does happen. Okay. I mean, let's be real. Okay. If you're a cop and you pull over a guy who is listening to F the police and is dressed a certain way, and then you pull over Gunnar Thorderson, okay, there are going to be preconceptions made because you are making those preconceptions. All of us are. Now, is that right? No. And that's where I want to be very, very clear. So some people will say, when I point out that fact that all of us are doing this, okay, I'll point it out. Like, that's wrong. You should judge someone as an individual, right? However, every individual is a part of a group, okay? I'm Mormon. I'm a conservative. I'm a man. So like for instance, you probably would assume, just not knowing me, you met me first minute, you probably would assume that I like to watch sports rather than to watch Desperate Housewives if I had the choice.
Yeah.
I don't know about that smirk, Gunnar. I think you might like to watch some Desperate Housewives. Anyway, but,
you might.
maybe it's a little bit. Anyway, but my point is, we make assumptions about people. Now, is that fair to me? Actually, technically, no. Maybe I'm super into that. Who are you to judge? Sexist, like stereotyping me. And there's people, groups have reputations. Okay. Right. Every group does. And unfortunately, young Black males have a bad reputation. And that is the reason that when you were walking around in Baltimore, you were a little more concerned in certain neighborhoods than others. Now, it isn't necessarily, but remember, that isn't necessarily because they are Black. Because like I said, if I see a group of Black businessmen walking, I'm not like, oh no. There are a million factors. There's a great book. Have you ever read Blink?
By Malcolm Gladwell. Yeah.
It talks about these instant perceptions that we have based on the world around us. We're constantly assessing risk. And that's what we do. Now, cops do that too. Is it right? No, it isn't. They need to be trained and they need to work hard not to do that. Okay. However, when your life is on the line and you know that Black suspects are 3 times more likely to kill you, not because you read the stats, but because your buddies were shot. Mm-hmm. You think they're going to treat everybody just the same? And I'm not talking about white cops. I'm talking about Black cops too. See, that's the thing. We're conflating race into this where we don't need to. Okay. And now I want to go to your point though. Something you did say that I want to just kind of jump on to help, because I think you're right. That doesn't change the subjective experience of Black people and the narratives that they hear and that they believe. Okay. And yes, I think some of these anecdotal experiences that do happen every once in a while make it worse. It's kind of like I get treated like crap or get called a racist. You're a racist. You're a racist. You're a racist for the things that I say, because there are some bad racists out there. Mm-hmm. And so people make assumptions about me and my motivations because I'm white and I'm saying something. You must be one of them, right? Mm-hmm. We shouldn't do that. Identity politics is poison. Like, to me, it's the whole Martin Luther King thing. It's like, dude, I'm not going to look at you and say, because you're Black, I'm going to make a judgment call on you. And don't make a judgment call on me because I'm white and assume that I have privilege. You know what I mean? Like, how dare someone go to a kid who's the son of that meth head woman living in a trailer park and tell him he has privilege and you need to pay reparations to Obama's daughters. Like, here's the thing. Why don't we just go to the kid and be like, hey, what's your life like, kid? Oh, it's a hellhole. Why don't we help you out? Like, what does race have to do with it? Let's help people that are in need, regardless. And guess what? Most of the people in need, there's a ton of Black people in need. So we should try to help them.
Right. I think it's sad about this whole thing. Like, in theory, absolutely, you're right. Like, to get to a colorblind society, like, would be ideal, to where, like, color is never a factor. And we don't have to talk about, like, the Black community or Black people having a different experience than, Mexican and white and Asian and all these, But I think for them, like, because slavery was, for them, right? And that's their experience. And then, everything after that, Jim Crow, and like Black people being partitioned off, and like, we're not going to give you home loans, and we're going to put you in the shitty parts of town, and you're not even going to be able to move over here. We don't allow you guys over here. And then that part of town develops at a rate much, much lower than the white parts of town, and all the wealth goes to the white parts of town. And this is multi-generational, that the Black people are just left over here and they aren't included in a way that's like, oh, well, yeah, they're using our bathrooms. I see them. I have to look at them, but they're not included in the economy in the same way. Multi-generational, and because
I would agree with you in this sense. There is, in the Black community, like, it's a rough experience. Like, it is not the experience that I have. Okay. All these riots and stuff, that's one of the things that's sad. All these riots and stuff's going on. It's not affecting my neighborhood. It's affecting theirs. And that's sad to me. And here's the thing. These things historically and stuff they did, they had an effect on them. And my sister actually was talking to me today. She was talking about kind of Mormon pioneer culture and kind of there's sort of this thing about being a Mormon and the pioneer heritage, right? And there's something that we kind of connect with in that, where for them in the Black community, slavery, Jim Crow, this history of terrible oppression. Where for them in the Black community, getting a little slavery, Jim Crow, echo here. History of terrible oppression. Oh, can you hear me all right?
I can hear you. So
okay.
I opened our YouTube link on accident.
Oh.
I think we're good though.
Okay. Anyway, what I was saying was, it's part of their identity, and they see the world kind of through this frame of oppression that happened to them. And I think that there is something to be said to validate that, like, look, your community got screwed over. Okay. But also I think there's more to that story, because I think that story also can cripple people.
But let me just take it 2 steps farther so I can tie it back into the police and get us right back to where we're at today. So, obviously they're developing at this slower rate because we're not fully integrating them in with our economy, in every way, shape, and form, right? So then you've got like Nixon, and they passed these laws where literally these guys were like, we're going to go arrest the Black community, and we're going to pick drugs that are predominantly used by the Black community at that time, where whites hadn't adopted the same drug use. And they go after that drug specifically.
Crack epidemic.
And they literally have quotes from guys in the administration, like, telling you point blank what their intentions are with these laws, to just enslave the Black community under our criminal justice system. And so when you give data today that's like, look, the Black cops and the white cops and the Black people and yada, 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 it's just not there. The problem is just, it's small. There's only 8 cases a year or whatever. And the media is getting a hold of them every single time and making a big deal out of them. And it's so, like, regardless of where the data's at, it's like, it's still a fact that, like, not only all those generations of, like, them having to be partitioned from society in a certain way and, like, growing at a slower rate, but the criminal justice system working against them in an unfair way, incarcerating them at rates that is unimaginable compared to white people. And that is, Rand Paul is a huge guy on that. Like, that is point blank in the data.
Let's slow down there for a second, because there's something that, and I recently posted about this. So let's talk for a minute about the war on drugs. Which is basically what you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
And the war on drugs and mass incarceration that began to happen during the war on drugs. Well, 2 things about it. One, the war on drugs began roughly in the 70s. Ended roughly mid 90s, let's say. Okay, maybe went even a little bit into that. So let's do a hypothesis here. If indeed there was a higher number of Blacks being imprisoned than whites, which is kind of the theory, correct? It's that during that time period, Blacks were being incarcerated at a higher rate than whites because they were going after those Black drugs. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think if I heard you right.
So if they are incarcerating more Blacks per capita than whites, we should see an increase in the Black percentage of the number of Blacks in prison as a percentage of the prison population. It should go up, right? Because you're arresting more and more Black people are coming in than white people are coming in. And so where it used to be the prison was, 20% of Black, 20% Black, now the prison is, 50% Black, right? Okay. That's kind of the expectation, the hypothesis. The problem is that if you actually look at the data during that time period, the rate stayed of prison population of Black prisoners stayed roughly in the ranges of 40 to 45%. Okay. There was not a spike that happened during that time. And something really interesting happened. Number one, and I have this actually, anybody who wants any of these stats, you want them afterwards, I can send it over to you. Mother Jones did a really interesting article on it. Interestingly enough, Mother Jones did.
Yeah. Wow.
And as crime went up in the 70s and 80s, they began to start locking people up, and you started having a ton of incarceration during the late 80s, early 90s. And guess what we saw right after that? A crash in the crime rates. So in other words, my hypothesis would be that as you locked up people that were criminal offenders, you had less criminals out on the streets committing crimes, and your crime rates went down because you locked up more people that were prone to crime. Now, were they all locked up for drug possession? I can tell you right now, if you were to venture to guess, what percentage of people in prison are there for drug possession charges? What would you venture to guess?
I don't know. I mean,
it's 3%. People say mass incarceration right now is this enormous problem of there's all these people that are being locked up for drug possession. It's 3%. And I'm fine with it. Let's take all of them out. You're still going to have 97% of what you had. There are 45,000 people in the prisons right now that are there for drug possession. And of those, and all the other ones, they're there for things, and that's of 1.2 million. So you're still going to have the same level of preparation.
Where the drug possession is the only charge?
What was that?
Is that where that data only accounts for when the drug possession was the only charge, or it's?
I think it is the charge. Their primary charge. It's on prisonpolicy.org. It's a whole website dedicated to all the stats around the prisons. And anyway, I was shocked. I didn't realize it. In fact, 700,000 people that are in prison right now are there for violent offenses, meaning rape, murder, armed robbery, aggravated assault. So the vast majority of the prison population is there for violent offenses. And so when we say mass incarceration, my thing, if we have a lot of people locked up and all of those people are indeed guilty of, serious prison-worthy offenses, I have no problem locking them up.
I know, but let's dive into that data. Tell me if it's 7%, right? First, how many people is that? And if they
7%, it was 3% for drug possession.
So let's say it's 3%. What is the demographics of that 3%?
I'm not sure. It doesn't provide the data of that. I would imagine a high number of that are African American. And I would say, and here's the thing, here's a true stat they put out. The problem is it's a little out of context. It is true that whites and blacks use drugs at the same rate. It is true that blacks get in trouble more for drug charges than whites. No doubt about it. But here's the question. How often are cops going around your neighborhood? Not very often. They are in the black neighborhood a lot. Why? Not because they're out to get black people, but because they have high rates of murder and violent crime in those neighborhoods. So that's where you send all your police. You send them to the areas that have the highest levels of violent crime. And so if you're doing drugs in a white neighborhood, well, guess what? There's no cops around. There's one cop in my neighborhood every, friggin' month. Where in a black neighborhood, you're seeing them 2 or 3 times a day driving by your house. So if you're out smoking in your backyard or doing something with your buddies and you're in a black neighborhood, you're far more likely to get caught than if you're in a white neighborhood. But that doesn't have to do with the fact that the cops are out there targeting them. Just because there's a disparity doesn't mean it's because of discrimination. We got to look at all potential factors and figure out which ones best describe the data.
Yeah. But I mean, I don't know. You'd have to see if the cops, if there are structural things that are causing these police departments to be we're only going to patrol the black neighborhoods, even though you still have car theft and home break-ins and package theft over in the white areas. They're just not patrolled as often. And I've worked some of those areas where they're the cops never come around here. Oh yeah, I called about my car getting broken into. The cops never come. like.
But I mean, do you think you're having similar rates of car break-ins in Provo, Utah, as you are in inner city
I'm
Baltimore?
talking about the areas I've worked, like in Dayton, Ohio, where you have like the black side and the white side of town, and they both are. I'm going to the poorest areas of them, right? Like dealing with where all the crime is, and you have like the white side saying the cops are never there, they never respond to the calls, and then you go to the black areas and it's patrols every 10 minutes. Like, oh, there goes the cops again. Yeah, it's probably the 40th time they've driven by today. It's like it's a different world these people live in.
It is. And I would say, now here's something I will say to kind of jump on your side of the fence, that the black community definitely have police more up in their business than white people do. Okay, there's no doubt about it. Now, I would argue that the reason that is because there's higher rates of violent crime, and so therefore they're focusing on those areas to actually try and protect black lives. However, we all know, I don't care, most cops are good. If you're rubbing shoulders with cops often, they'll piss you off. Okay, I'm a big supporter of the police, but I also know that police can be douchebags, big time. And I know, I mean, my brother, he was out with his buddies. They were out shooting jackrabbits, like a bunch of idiots, and they were too close to a residential area. A bunch of cops showed up, drew guns on them, had them cuffed, laid them on the ground. These are a bunch of like the most Mormon-y bunch of kids you've ever seen. Handcuffed them, laid them on the ground for 45 minutes on like kind of a cold night. Took them in, booked them at the jail. All of them got mugshot. It was hilarious, actually. It was like super funny, but like, and it was scary because my brother at that time was he was getting his commission to go to the Naval Academy.
Oh man.
And that would have got him the boot. Luckily, they were able to get the judge to drop the charges because it was like, hey, you guys are being stupid kids. Now, would that have happened for a black kid? I don't know, right? And if that wouldn't happen for a black kid, then I got a problem with that. Yeah. I do. And I'm not going to lie. If you're around cops a lot, they will piss you off. And so I can see where they're coming from with that. But I think we got to measure our, magnitude matters. How much of a problem is this? Is it such a problem that we need to be out burning down police precincts? I mean, is it that serious?
I think you look at, the right and the left, like, and their views toward police, and it's like these incidences happen. And I know, like, to get you people on our side to even just admit like what you just said is like, it's a huge thing, right? Like, this is awesome progress to get, the type of stuff we've seen online from a lot of people on the right to just outwardly condemn what happened, to not go into their usual, which is what we've witnessed on almost every previous incident, their usual, well, we don't have all the facts, we're just going to wait, don't say anything now, we're going to just kind of wait for the
long to wait for the facts. I kind of
I'm just giving you the regular, it's probably the cops probably had right cause, we don't know the full story, the cops are always doing their job, and it's like finally we have everybody being like, okay, this is definitely wrong, like this should not happen and people need to get in trouble. Right. And like have that is awesome because we don't get that every time. Right. We get deflection. We get, apologism.
Yeah. It's kind of weird that people are acting like there are people out there that are like, no, I totally deserve to be choked to death on the like, no one was saying that. Like, who was that? So everyone is on the side of what happened to George Floyd was wrong. And there needs to be a conviction and all that kind of stuff. Now, with that in mind, okay, one problem we have, and this is another area where I do think that there's some things in criminal justice that could be adjusted. And that is one of the challenges you have, or I guess, I don't know about being adjusted, but just something that's a challenge. Remember, if a cop just meets a guy that moment and that guy ends up dead, it's very hard to prove that he intended to kill him. I mean, how many of us, when you just meet someone, have an intent to murder them? That's why normally when cops kill people wrongly, it's very, very easy to say that it was criminal negligence because it's very, very hard to show. And in my argument is actually, it very rarely would happen that a person just met a guy and then has malicious intent to commit like first or second degree murder, where you literally are like, I'm trying to kill you. Also, another challenge you have is that cops rightfully are authorized to do things that can potentially cause serious bodily harm. You know what I mean? We do give them that authority. And so if they make a mistake that kills someone, it is much easier to argue, just because of the nature of the situation, that the cop was negligent rather than malicious. Where if I come over to your house and all of a sudden I'm on you and I have my knee on your neck and I'm doing that, like basically your only thing you could think is I'm trying to kill you. Where a cop can say, I'm trying to hold this guy down. And it's very hard to prove that that isn't what he was doing and that he made a mistake, right? And so when you look at these cases, the cops, unfortunately, and it's not necessarily like, it's just hard. I mean, if you're like, how do you prove beyond a reasonable doubt, according to our system of justice, that, and we can't get rid of beyond a reasonable doubt. I mean, you don't want to throw people in jail who really did just make a mistake and convict them. I mean, obviously you can throw them in jail for
outside, Jacob, outside of like just the regular like court of law with like, you know, due process, like we're talking about like systems in place where, you know, the prosecutors who are assigned the case are the best friends with the cops, and
they're not, the problem.
They're you know, they're just like, oh, I already threw away the evidence, bro. You're good, bro. The judge isn't even.
I mean that kind of corruption. I don't have any doubt that it happens.
So let's say, as to your point though, right? Like we have all these cases where cop, you know, ends up killing, you know, an unarmed black guy, or let's just say, you know, any type of black person, where they're bringing up these cases, and you're saying, you know, everybody wants them to just go get right away charged with murder, and it's just hard to prove. And the fact is, we have a system that is just designed to protect cops just by default, right? Like to give them the sort of like
intentionally. What do you mean by that? Kind of specifically, like what specific things are there that are designed intentionally to protect cops?
Well, I mean, there's just like, you know, if they fear for their life, you're basically justified, right? If there's any cause for a policeman to fear for their life, then cause to kill, right? Like I feared for my life.
Is that if you can show reasonably in a court of law that you feared for your life, can you be justified in killing someone?
No, but a police officer, you know, it's always,
at least in Nevada you can. In Nevada, if you have reasonable fear of either your life or serious harm, you can shoot someone. Now that's up to the jury to decide if you're full of it or not.
Right. I'm just saying, like there are plenty of cases where, you know, they weren't there. There was no fear for your life, yet the black person ended up dead somehow. Right.
Do you think the jury system helps with that? I mean, at the end of the day, it has to be a jury from that area of as unbiased people as they can. And I don't know, maybe they have rigged juries sometimes.
Shot to death. They're not, you know, there's no jury for them to go to be like, oh, he didn't speed, he wasn't speeding there, or oh, they didn't run that stoplight, or oh, he didn't forge that money from that counterfeit bill, or oh, he was pretending to have a gun and he didn't when he tried to rob my store. Like there are all these cases where they just end up dead. Like they don't get their day in court. And if the system is designed in a way right now where it's unfair to black people and they're getting killed in all of these cases where they just absolutely shouldn't, then we need to take time to figure out how we fix this and give it enough of our attention and put the police, the you know, pro-police crowd that will never sit down for reform and say, you guys get to take a back seat right now as we figure out what the hell we're going to do as a country to figure this out, not just on the national level, but in every community, right? In every police department, in every police precinct, right? It's like this moment is necessary for us to make structural change on every single level.
So speaking of structural change, so I want to shift gears a little bit on this as we kind of get closer to the end here.
Mm-hmm.
I want to talk a little bit about maybe some of the political dynamics involved in all of this. Okay. Because in my mind, and I just want to look at the incentives. I'm not trying to say anyone's doing anything explicitly, but I can't help but notice there is an incentive to tell people that the system is broken if you are the party that's here to fundamentally transform the system. In other words, from the left, the narrative is they have an incentive in the media and amongst those who are in that class and that group to tell people that they're oppressed, to whether it's true or not, because it gets them votes. Because the idea is here's my sales pitch. And you're a sales guy, you know how this works. You have to get someone to realize that they need your product or service. And the Democrats are selling their services. And their services are, what is the Democrat thing? It's you're oppressed, and we are the party of the oppressed. And so you got to tell people they're oppressed. And here's the thing, if they're not oppressed, you got to find ways. You got to create microaggressions in order to get people to feel like they're being oppressed, because that's how you get political points. And what I worry about in all of this is that Black Lives Matter isn't really about Black lives. Otherwise, they'd actually be in Chicago, where Black lives are being destroyed every single day. Instead, they're only taking advantage of the Black cases that can be used for political advantage. And when it's a Black and a white, or a Black and a police officer, you can create a left-right narrative.
Well, when whites hold the institutions of power and they're the ones who would make the structural change that you need to have happen because your community is being oppressed by that system, then they would need to find a narrative that includes the white people.
But I would argue that the oppression is not happening through that system. I would say that when you look at the actual statistics, what you're finding is and I'm not saying it doesn't exist at all, but magnitude matters. What they're doing is they're taking very, very small issues here and there, anecdotes, a bad cop here or there, and then they turn the story into a referendum on the entire system and all of America and our history, and it's just this giant thing, when really what it was a damn cop acting like an idiot, acting like an ass, and he ended up killing someone. And so in my mind, it's like, why are you taking that and then extrapolating out? And I think this is why. Because there's a political incentive to do so. It's politically advantageous to the media and to all the powers that be to immediately jump into these cases. Why do you think all the politicians care about the death of this guy, but not all of those people that are dying every day in those Black communities? It's because to them, Black lives don't matter unless it gets them a vote.
Well, no, I think for them, their position is to reform the police, right? Like
And why haven't they done it? The police run these Democrat cities. Who runs the police force in Baltimore? The mayor and the city council. And guess what? Has Baltimore had a Republican mayor? Like, never. Chicago, Detroit, these are all Democrat cities. This is one of the ironies to me. They're all policing is handled at the local level, right? It's a local jurisdiction. So the system that they want to change is a police system that is being run by Democrats and has been run by Democrats. And here's my big thing to the Black community. Wake up. It's those Democrats in your city who are running your police forces that run the system. If you want to change the system, maybe you need to boot all those guys out, because those are the people who are running the system. The police system is run at the city level, and all of these cities are Democrat-run cities.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you there. You know, I agree with you there. We should.
We can jump on the Democrat issues and political side of it. I think we'll get a little more close to the.
Hey, You know, vote the Republicans in no matter what. I do want the Republicans to open their eyes a little on this issue and at least see where the other side is coming from, and hopefully
I would say,
we can meet at the table.
Go ahead. Yeah, no, I was going to say, you're right. You're 100% right. And I am a prime example of a problem that we have in the Republican Party. And maybe your voice is good here because I think you help with this. I'm too, and people don't respond to someone just like ripping into it, right? Yeah. What's that phrase? You capture more bees with honey, or flies with honey, or whatever.
Something.
And my issue is that, and Republicans are bad at that. And I think we need to have a better outreach to the Black community. I really think there are Black voices, Black conservative voices that we as the conservative movement need to elevate to the top as much as we can. We need to create a new narrative for the Black community. We need to say, look, the Democrats have failed you. We are not your enemies. We are your friends. And come and join us and let's make some change. But they got to realize when you come to our side, we're going to be the party of personal responsibility. And we're going to be the party that says, you know, you need to get married. You know, you're not going to have a stable society with a 70%. You know, it's hard to do.
People are not going to want to come to the right if we don't have a plan in place that says, this is how we're going to make the police work for you and work better for your community and be more responsive and be less racially biased and have less of these issues of, you know, just absolute, you know, atrocity occurring when it absolutely shouldn't. Like, what safeguards need to be put in place so this never happens again? And if the right can't come forward and reach out to the Black community with a plan on how we're going to reform the system to work better for them, then none of the other issues will matter. They're not going to listen on any of the other issues because this is the end issue.
I think you have a good point there. And I think that surprisingly, President Trump has made inroads with for everyone who's like painting him as a racist. I'm kind of like, dude, this guy has done more things to like involve Blacks into kind of the White House and, you know, pardoning people and declaring Martin Luther King's landmark or making his birthplace a national monument or something. Anyway, he's done a lot of outreach there. He's talked about criminal justice reform. Rand Paul is another one that I think can make some inroads there, but I do agree. But I'll tell you what, it's a tough thing for me. And I guess I'll kind of end my point on this. People call me a racist and all this kind of stuff. And it rolls off my shoulders. And here's my thing. I care about the Black community. I actually care about Black lives. I want to see the Black community thrive. But I also know if we don't diagnose the problem properly and all we do is empathize, but we never actually get, I mean, I can put my arm around you all day, but at some point I got to say, if you're doing something really, really dumb, or if there's some big problem that, you know, I gotta be honest with you and tell you what you got to do to get things back on track. And so I want the Black community to thrive. But I think that we're misdiagnosing the problems because here's the thing. The problems are hard problems and the truth is hard truth. And it's much easier to virtue signal online and pledge your solidarity with Black people and all that kind of stuff and virtue signal, which feels good for you as you feel really good about yourself, rather than doing the thing that's hard and actually having the real hard conversation about what the actual root causes are to some of these issues. And just blaming it on racism all day long, that just isn't what the data shows.
Yeah, I think, you know, for me, I don't see people on the right getting into the Black community on a deep enough personal level to be like, what is it that you guys are struggling with here on the ground? What's, what is causing all of these young men to choose, to get in this drug lifestyle where they just want to mob around and sell weed and like, grow their base and their list and, just buy a bunch of guns and just float those on social media, the guns and the weed and this is my lifestyle. This is how I make my living. I got my girls. I got this. It's like, what do we need to do on the ground? Is it after school programs? Is it, better job opportunities on the ground?
You're kind of putting it government programs. I think culturally, and I actually think, who I think can make outreach are Black conservatives.
Yeah.
I think we need to have Black conservative voices.
I agree, but I do think there are very real issues that need to be addressed that are specific to the Black community that conservatives just aren't having those conversations because they aren't amplifying those voices of Black leaders in those areas that, have those type of issues. And obviously that aren't just your stereotypical leftist issues that those identity leaders in the community are standing for, right? So finding ways to solve problems in conservative ways that let them know that we're actually there for them, that we're listening, and that we still want to amplify Black conservative voices who are going to give our approach to solving those problems that's going to work better than the government programs that the Democrat mayors and city council Democrat leaders in those areas are failing those people. But it's they're not going to come to the table and talk to us about how the right can fix those problems if we aren't first hearing them out and empathizing and amplifying their own leaders and just letting them know that their voices are heard. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. In fact, I was going to say that may be really good advice to someone like me because that's, like I said, I think that your approach and that softer approach can definitely make more of an impact. And maybe that's where we can make a good team in the conservative movement. I'll look for the hard data, and you can actually go and actually develop relationships with people and make inroads with that. Cause that's, I think that actually, that really does matter. It's one thing to have the right product. It's another thing to be able to actually sell it. Right. And I think we have the right product, but I'm a shitty salesman. So,
hey, well, I do it for a living, so we'll see. But dude, it's been a pleasure being on here, Jacob. We'll have to do this again, man.
Yeah, it was fun. So anyway, we'll sign off now. It was good talking.
Yeah, good talking. See you, man.